I'm one of the voices you can use to speech-enable content, devices, applications and more. When I read your text, it sounds like this. Please note that the maximum number of characters is 20,000. A research team was combing the coastline of southwest Portugal in 2019 in search of signs of how its ecosystem had changed over time. They stumbled upon an astonishing and unexpected scene. Bees that had been mummified in subterranean sarcophagi for nearly 3,000 years. An unlikely series of events had conspired to preserve this helpless horde of pollinators over millenniums. Whatever had happened, it was an unlucky night for hundreds of adult bees that were ready to leave their cocoons, said Carlos Neto de Carvalho, a paleontologist and scientific coordinator at the Naturteo UNESCO Global G Park in Portugal. These were not typical European honeybees in a hive, but members of a group called Eucera. The bees spend most of their year-long lives gestating underground and eating pollen left by their mothers, emerging for only a few weeks when their favorite flowering plant blooms. Considering the clues, Mr. Neto de Carvalho and his colleagues deduced that the bees had most likely met an abrupt demise. Hundreds of bees preserved in their brood nests just before exiting means that something catastrophic happened for them in what is now the sunny coast of Portugal, he said. The team described its discovery last month in the journal Papers in Paleontology and offered a hypothesis for what killed the trapped bees. Bees have evolutionary staying power, and their ancestors are known to have lived on Earth over the course of 120 million years. They have withstood wild climate swings and thrived wherever a flowering plant might have rooted. But finding actual fossilized bee bodies, unlike turtle bones preserved in sediment layers, is rare. The exoskeleton of bees, and insects in general, is made of chitin, a cellulose-like biopolymer that quickly is decomposed after the animal dies. Mr. Neto de Carvalho wrote in an email, "What bees typically leave are trace fossils or ichnofossils, imprints frozen in time of bodies, abandoned or active nests, or old burrows." The cocoons that the team discovered were lined and sealed with a silk-like thread produced by the mother bee. This thread was a waterproof, organic polymer, a mixture of material and structural engineering, that had fostered the preservation of the bees inside. Mr. Neto de Carvalho said that this organic mortar had protected the cells from the environment, shielding the delicate chitin from bacterial activity and decomposition. Sealed in their cocoons, the bees mummified, preserving their body shape and distinctive features. The team used X-ray microcomputed tomography, a type of CT scanning that captures detailed images of small things like insects, to examine the mummified bees without destroying the protective cocoons. I think what makes this study so cool is that you do have the bee in there and you can see that it's in the tribe Euterini, which are the longhorned bees, said Brian Danforth, an entomologist at Cornell University who was not involved in the study. If you look at the CT image, you can see the long antennae, so you know it's a male. Usually, determining what created a fossilized brood cell is tricky. There are other animals that burrow into the soil that might create a thing that looks like a bee nest. Dr. Danforth said. The discovery, he added, is the first ichnofossil that actually contains the bee inside of it. As for what killed the bees, the researchers considered flooding or a prolonged drought that might have limited food supplies. But the pollen stored inside the cells told the team that the bees had plenty of food, meaning they didn't die by starvation. Their hypothesis, instead, is shifting weather. We assume that a sudden drop to freezing temperatures in that early spring was responsible for the massive death at the soil level, Mr. Neto de Carvalho said. While this nest is an example of a localized mass death, it could also be a reminder of how bees have persevered in the face of shifting climate conditions. There are still more than 25 species of Eucera-like bees living in different habitats in Portugal. We expect this discovery will bring us more information about how these animals became resilient to climate change, Mr. Neto de Carvalho said. The Eucera bee mummies can be considered, therefore, a message of hope in this world of climatic chaos we are living presently. 100 more extensive fossil record of bee brood nests and cells, Calychnia, in siliciclastic sedimentary deposits or palaeosols is virtually devoid of the presence of their producers. The absence of a more specific assignment to a producer of the different ichnogenera of the ichno-family Celliformid precludes their use in phylogenetic and paleobiogeographic studies. Omission surfaces developed in incipient carbonate palaeosols during the late Holocene, Middle Neoglacial, c. 2975 Urcal BP on the southwest coast of mainland Portugal show insect Calychnia in dense ichnofabrics dominated by shallow discrete cells, Palmrachnus castellanosi, and cells at the terminus of vertical shafts. At Carrera Brava, one of the studied sites, bees ready to abandon their cells were found in an exceptional state of preservation inside the sealed brood chambers. The chambers also preserve the inner cell hydrophobic polymerized membrane and remains of the monospecific Brassicaceae type pollen provision. Although the cause of mass mortality remains a mystery, oxygen depletion due to sudden flooding of the nesting substrate and consequent or overnight temperature drop just before emergence are plausible causes. The anaerobic conditions and later rapid carbonate diagenetic lithification are the likely causes of the preservation of the bees and the inner cell organic membrane. The favorable climate conditions for the development of successive, dense ichnofabrics from an omission suite dominated by bee brood cells may be the result of slightly colder and higher precipitation winters during the neoglacial interval. Which came first, bees or flowers? Find points to bees. Before time turned them to stone at least 220 million years ago, the fossilized logs of the petrified forest in eastern Arizona stood as tall trees in a tropical environment. Many of them, scientists have now discovered, still bear traces of insect nests the trees once harbored. The logs are riddled with holes containing little chambers strung together in lines or clusters, nearly everything about them resembling the nests of modern bees. The problem is that flowers date from only half as long ago. Could bees have lived before flowers? The very idea, once unthinkable, is upsetting traditional theory about the early history of bees and their supposed co-evolution with flowering plants or angiosperms. If confirmed by further research, the new findings at the petrified forest mean that bees were buzzing around some 140 million years earlier than previously thought. The oldest known fossil of a bee is an 80-million-year-old specimen trapped in ember from present-day New Jersey. Scientists now must be on the lookout for fossil bees to fill that huge time gap. And then they must figure out what those bees were doing before the emergence of angiosperms, the earliest evidence for which is dated at 110 million to 120 million years ago. Either flowers actually appeared much earlier than anyone can conceive, or the first bees did without flowers for a long time, feeding on and pollinating cone-bearing, woody plants known as gymnosperms, a group that includes conifers, cycads and ferns. In the latter and more likely case, scientists said, the discovery casts serious doubt on the standard theory that flowering plants and social insects like bees more or less evolved together, with the spread of flowers presumably influencing the development and proliferation of the bees. This new evidence suggests it was probably the other way around, and that insects like bees and wasps may have facilitated the evolution and diversification of angiosperms, said Stephen T. Hasiatis, a paleobiologist at the United States Geological Survey in Denver and a doctoral student in geology at the University of Colorado at Boulder. Mr. Hasiatis came upon the fossil bee nests while conducting studies aimed at reconstructing the ancient ecosystem and climate at the petrified forest, particularly as it applied to invertebrate life. He and other researchers found the remains of several hundred nests and cocoons, and tests put their ages at 207 million to 220 million years. Although no bee or wasp body parts were found with the fossil nests, they said, the only creatures that make similar structures today are bees and wasps. The discovery was announced last week by Mr. Hasiatis at a regional meeting of the Geological Society of America, held at Montana State University in Bozeman. His collaborators were Dr. Russell W. of the Geological Survey in Denver and Dr. Tim Demko of Colorado State University. Despite the discovery's stunning implications, other scientists tended to react favorably, in part because the evidence seemed compelling and it supported recent revisionist thinking about insect evolution. This stems from a growing recognition that the greatest expansion and diversification of insects occurred many millions of years before the appearance of flowering plants. "We are all very impressed," said Dr. Charles D. Michener, an entomologist at Kansas University in Lawrence, who is the author of The Social Behavior of the Bees, published by Harvard University Press in 1974. Mr. Hasiadis visited the Kansas campus earlier this year and showed the evidence to Dr. Michener and his colleagues. Dr. Michener agreed that the fossil nests looked like the clusters of chambers or cells that